Yep, we're streaming.
Wonderful. All right. Well, good afternoon, good morning, and good day to everybody around the world that is joining us as part of our Microsoft Teams for Academic and Research faculty. Very excited to have you here with us. If you could do a quick favor, on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see there's a message center. We'll be posting announcements, and you can also ask your questions throughout the session today. So to begin with, if you can just put a quick message in saying, yes, I can hear you. Just want to make sure everyone can see the audio and video. So a quick yes or even a smiley face will do. And from there, we will begin. So I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Dominic Williamson, and I'm part of the Microsoft Teams Communication Product Group. Wonderful to be able to speak with you all today, and thank you very much for your time. What we'll be talking about today is Microsoft Teams for Education, and really the use cases and an introductory overview how it can be used in two key scenarios around academic course delivery and also around the ability for you to be able to do research collaboration. So for those who would like to keep in contact with me after the session today, you'll see there at Dominic Will IT. That will allow you to be able to go through and keep in contact. And if you've got any questions after the session today, please feel free to reach out. It's also a place where I'll be posting updates from the product team. So you'll also be hearing from Giuliano via the chat. So he'll be the person answering your questions, and he's part of our Microsoft Teams product group as well. Giuliano, I did think I heard your sounds coming through the microphone, so you might just need to do a quick mute. And then from there, we'll jump straight into it. And Cortana is jumping in. All right. So I want to begin with you with a real example from a university and how an academic there, Dr. Kellerman, is using Microsoft Teams with his students. So this is a university from Australia. So that's originally where I'm from. For those that have picked the accent as Australian, you are correct. Even though I'm living in Seattle now as part of the product team, the University of New South Wales in Australia is one of our largest universities. And Dr. Kellerman is an academic there. And he is part of the engineering course. And that engineering course had a bit of a unique challenge where they have 17,000 students as part of the course. And Dr. Kellerman teaches as one of the first-year cohorts. And with his engineering class, what he ran into was really that engagement. When you have so many students as part of a course, how do you engage students in the conversation, in the learning experience? And so what Dr. Kellerman did was he combined Microsoft Teams with their LMS. Rather than jumping straight into features around chat and collaboration, I wanted to share with you how Dr. Kellerman is using it within his course itself. And so this is where you'll see you've got the ability to come through, and Dr. Kellerman had within the LMS a place absolutely where people could post questions. But one of the challenges, though, was how do we have that real-time conversation space? And so Dr. Kellerman then came and brought Microsoft Teams with a focus on how does he use it then as part of the course experience. So what you're seeing here is now one of his students. And one of the things that you will see with Microsoft Teams is that real-time focus on conversation and collaboration. And so what Annabelle was able to do was go through and then post questions to her colleagues, to her classmates. And what was extremely interesting about the way that that changed was because this was now a real-time experience across devices where Annabelle, for example, could hear from one of her fellow students. On their smartphone, through a push notification, they actually found that this was increasing the engagement compared to previous semesters where they were using things like a message board. And why was that? Well, the reason for that is because it aligns now when we think about the students within our courses coming in as digital natives with the expectation for things like having real-time communication across their choice of device, whether it's an iPhone, whether it's a Samsung Galaxy, whether it's a Windows laptop. And what that allowed Dr. Kellerman to then do is provide a platform that engaged the students and brought them into the course community. And you'll see that that's where it led to an 800% increase as part of the student experience year over year. But one of the challenges, though, that he also wanted to say, well, is how do we then look at the academic performance, particularly when we think about students and in a large cohort like what Dr. Kellerman had, where you could see here, for example, we had lecture theatres that were big, as you would expect in a first-year course. The challenge with that, though, is I guarantee you not every single student was there, and Dr. Kellerman knew this. So he thought, how does he then also make the students have access to their course content on demand from their choice of device from a singular place. And so this is when we talk about Microsoft Teams as the hub for communication and collaboration. What Dr. Kellerman did was he was able to then bring in an experience using then Microsoft Stream. So it's the ability where he could then live stream his lecture recordings out to his students. And then on top of that, students could come back and then watch it on demand as they needed. And so this is where we saw Dr. Kellerman then using that video library, so that way students could come back, and particularly when we think about things like engineering and mathematical equations, where you're probably not going to remember every single equation the first time that you see it. This was how then Dr. Kellerman could make this on demand and available to his students by then bringing together the ability for Teams to have live lecture recordings with up to 250 students simultaneously, and if you do a live event, up to multiple thousands of students simultaneously in a broadcast approach. And so this is where he was able to make these then recordings available on demand within that singular team. I'd also like to make note, we're going to go through an overview of Teams today in terms of some of the structures and the ways that you can use it. And you'll see there on that left-hand side, Dr. Kellerman was using channels. Now, we'll talk more about channels a little bit later on, but you can see here the channels that he had were around his week topics. So, for example, week 1, week 2. Now, when you run your course, you might want to arrange this differently. Or we'll see in a few moments how we could do things like a research project and then have maybe our data collection as one channel, our grant process discussions as a separate channel. The channels are really a way to structure the team that you create. And here's just a quick example within Dr. Kellerman's course. But on top of that, what we also have is not then just about the ability for people to speak with each other via video or via chat on their device, but it's also that collaborative real-time experience. So you'll see here, Dr. Kellerman, and this is in a video that you'll all receive access to by the end of this webinar today, he was also then using things like the pen. And so when we think about the experience of how do we relay the content we're trying to share, notation is not something that is represented by the A, B, C, D on your keyboard. But absolutely, when we use things like a digital stylus on, for example, a Surface here, this is where Dr. Kellerman could use apps like OneNote, where he could then represent abstract ideas like formula, like if we think also not just engineering and mathematics, but even if we look towards, for example, music, and we think about musical notation, if we think about business and maybe a supply and demand graph in economics, all of these things are so much easier to represent when we use something like a pen. And what this was doing is by using, again, things like the OneNote class notebook as part of a team, students could then see the recordings. They could also then have access to those lecture notes that he's making live in front of them within a few seconds, syncing back to their device. And so this is where we see the example of how Microsoft Teams is being used in partnership with their learning management system to really create the course community, as well as also a hub for all of the experiences that the students had. So that's a real example of how Microsoft Teams is being used today by an academic. And we're going to go together in a bit more depth with, well, how did Dr. Kellerman get there from a Teams point of view? But I'd just like to set the scene a little bit more then, just from a Microsoft Teams product point, just so that you're all aware. Just because Microsoft is one of the first words in the title of the product does not mean it only runs on a Microsoft device. So if you're using a Windows laptop or an Apple MacBook, great news, you have an identical experience with the installed application. If you're using, for example, an Android tablet, an iPad, again, you have access to Microsoft Teams available on all of these hardware choices. You'll see there, for example, iPhone and Android. If you open up and look, it's completely free to install the Microsoft Teams app. Microsoft Teams for Education is free, available for all universities. So that's all staff, all students on the planet have access to this at no extra cost. So you should be able to log in today, right now. If you're listening to this and you want to log in and start your own team, there should be nothing to stop you. If for some reason you can't log in, then that's a conversation you can have with your IT administrator, because they might not have given you the free license you're entitled to. But absolutely, you can go to the iPhone store, you can go to the Google App Store today and then install the Teams app. And one of the things I would recommend having a quick notice is if you're, for example, in America, you'll see that there is 30,000 reviews on iPhone, and it's 4.7 out of 5 with an average review score. And it's 4.5 out of 5 on Android. And so we're really committed as a product team to make sure you get the best experience on your choice of device. And that's just from an example in the United States. Teams is available all around the world in 44 different languages in almost every single market. So we'll talk a bit more about that in just a second. But I wanted to also share, if you are using a browser, so Microsoft Edge in Windows 10, Chrome or Firefox, for example, again, you can still see Teams and use Teams today. And you'll actually notice that everything I will be doing is from the browser. You'll see myself using Edge and Chrome and how it's the same experience across both. And we're trying as best as we can to make sure you have the same experience on all platforms and devices. There are some slight differences between browser, iPhone, and for example, a laptop, but where we can, we try to make sure it's a consistent experience across all. And so this is where I wanted to set the scene just as a quick overview, where Microsoft Teams for Education is one of the fastest growing applications Microsoft has ever released. And it's not just in education that we're seeing universities like Dr. Kellerman at UNSW using Teams. You can see, for example, that we have over 329,000 companies today that are using Teams. So that's universities, those are schools, but those are also businesses. Those are Fortune 100 companies, so 87 of the Fortune 100 companies today are using Teams. We also have large universities, large corporate customers with over 10,000 users actively using Teams every day. And you might be saying, well, why am I sharing this with you? Well, the reason for that is because it's also when we think about the professional skills that we're investing in for ourselves, but also the skills that we're providing to our students as part of their university experience. This is a tool set that they will use as they leave the lecture theatre, as they leave their research project, and they move into the professional world. And so this is something that Microsoft has invested in very heavily, both as a business application, but also as an educational experience to support the learning and research scenarios that we'll be talking about. And as I mentioned, it is available around the world, and today we support over 44 languages. So this is a product where we're really making sure it creates inclusive learning environments and inclusive working environments for everybody. You'll see here on the right-hand side, when we talk about Microsoft Teams, you've heard me refer to it as that hub for communication and collaboration. And so from a communication point of view, absolutely, this is where you'll see we have then chat, meetings, and calling. So this is where, for those that might be using Skype for Business today, you can then within Teams still have that one-on-one private chat. You can now also have small group chat with up to 20 people giving you a private breakout space within one click. You can then call someone within your university, and that way you don't have to ask for their mobile number. Because you're part of the same university, it's a great way to be able to reach out to the person that you might want to arrange a coffee catch-up with to discuss a research idea. Or if we think about students wanting to do an impromptu online study session, again, this is where chat allows us to have this ability within one click to be able to search for each other and then start conversations and online calls. When we look back then at Dr. Kellerman, how does he do something like a large lecture recording, a large lecture delivered to his students live? Well, that's where we have meetings. So this is where, just like Skype for Business, 250 people can join live real-time simultaneously. Now, the thing that we have announced publicly is that this is the future of our telephony and communications platform. So what you're going to see here is we also have the ability for calling. And so you can come in and then within Teams, make calling if you have a license assigned. If you don't see that today, no worries. But just to share that this is also, when we talk about Skype for Business and the future of that platform, that is Microsoft Teams. But the exciting thing about this is it's built on a new infrastructure. And so this means we can do things in Teams that you could never do in the past with Skype for Business. So for example, simultaneous full-way high-definition video calling. So you can see 4 people's video feed at once, in addition to the 246 of the other people as they actively speak will be brought into view. But it's not then just about the ability for people to meet online. It's also how do we collaborate from a single hub. And so this is where you've now seen it switch to, you can see files being highlighted. Within Word documents, within PowerPoint, within Excel, the Office documents allow you to then collaborate in real time. So that means it's no longer attaching a PowerPoint presentation to an email, clicking send, and now waiting for someone to reply back. And in the meantime, you've made a change, and now you've got 2 different versions you're going to have to spend more time trying to bring back together. Within Teams, we have the ability then to work together in real time, and simply by adding that document to the team, we can edit, we can work together. We don't have to send each other share links, we don't have to set up folder permissions. By simply being in that team, we can then work together. And we can also bring in other parts of the Office 365 suite, like Power BI, like Flow, like Planner, to assign tasks and track projects, for example, like a research initiative. But it's not then just Microsoft apps. You also have the ability then from the store, where you can come in and inside of the store, bring in a whole host of third-party applications, from well-known educational tools and research tools like RSpace, for example, to do eLab book notation, to Adobe Cloud Connect, to even if you're using Trello today, for example, and you want to integrate your Trello board, absolutely you can do that. For those doing computer science, you'll see there you've got Bitbucket, GitHub. You can bring code repository connections back into Microsoft Teams, and many more. The last part I want to talk about on the apps, though, is think about this a lot like the apps on your smartphone. It's a store that's managed by Microsoft, but once those apps are published to the store, it means they've gone through a certification process. So they've been checked by Microsoft to make sure that they're safe and secure, that they meet minimum content standards. But beyond that point, that's when it's now up to you. Is this something that's appropriate for your course? Is this paid or free? That's not up to Microsoft, that's up to the app developers. And it's exactly the same like the apps on the smartphone and that choice that you make in terms of the quality of the experience. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on today. But it's very, very powerful. And so I want to share with you then two key scenarios that we're going to talk through today: course community and research collaboration. You've seen a great example of the community that Dr. Kellerman created within his course, where he had then students were able to communicate in real time with one another. They asked questions and they would then respond to one another's questions, reinforcing their own learning. As we will see, for example, when you think about how does the learning approach happen, when you teach someone something, that is the highest possible retention that you can create for yourself compared to, for example, writing it down or listening to it being spoken. But what does it look like then if we want to work with colleagues? So we're not thinking about students. We now want to do a research project within our university, or we want to collaborate with colleagues and fellow researchers from across the state, the country, or even the world. And so this is where I want to share a different example with you. And so this is the Hart Research Institute. The Hart Research Institute provides then 150 international projects that they're currently working on. And as part of the work that they're doing is, you'll see there, it goes through and you can see them meeting together real time within Teams. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. There's one minor typo in there, but I'll fix that up a little bit later on. In terms of, you might be saying then, well, I've got a research project set up, or I've got a class that I'm looking to manage. How does that research project actually then get created? Absolutely, you can create it yourself, and certainly you can create your own class and course teams. One of the things that we would recommend, though, is you've got the ability within to automate team creation. And so this is something today, as you see the ability to create a team, and you say, well, look, I'd love to use this in my course, in my research project. However, I don't want to have to manually add in 200 students. This is something, a conversation that you can have then with your IT professionals who will then help you be able to then set this up in terms of an automated way to create teams. And I just wanted to share that this is something you can do as we start to go through. But let's get into it. Let's look at some real teams and real examples of how it can be used. So you'll see here the way to start and to get access to Microsoft Teams. If you haven't already installed it on your device, so for example from the App Store like we spoke about before, or if you haven't got in and then downloaded the app on a Windows laptop or on your Apple MacBook, it's simply from office.com. So what we see when we go and look at office.com is you've got the ability to now head over, and what you'll see there, all of the applications that are part of Office 365. Now, what these applications do, these are the productivity tools from Microsoft. So names that you probably all will know, like Outlook, Word, Excel. The online versions, which is what you see here via office.com, allow you to be able to access them from then any web browser. And so what we'll be talking about today, as you would expect, is Microsoft Teams. But this is the best way to come back to office.com to see all of the different apps that you can bring in. So for example, we'll talk about the OneNote class notebook. We'll talk about how we can use things like forms to provide real-time feedback or do quizzes with students, and how things like Stream, which you saw earlier with Dr. Kellerman, allowed his engineering students to review content on demand. So you can think about this a little bit like your own internal YouTube. But let's go and click on Teams and get straight into a real example of Teams and do a bit of an introduction and an overview of the Teams experience itself. And you'll see right now that I'm currently using this in the Edge browser. We'll also use Chrome a little bit later on. So I'm currently in Edge, and you'll see here when we load up Teams, so teams@microsoft.com, on the left-hand side, this is really the place to sort of focus your attention when you first start. That left-hand side, that app bar, What this is allows you to be able to, and I might zoom in just a little bit for everybody. You see here on the left-hand side, that app bar gives you the ability to always move between the different parts of Teams. So whether we're talking about the activity feed to be made aware of notifications, when we're talking about chat, which is what we spoke about before. So you'll see here when I click on chat, the app bar on the left will stay there, but the view will change. And so now you can see that I've moved across and we can see there's a conversation called Lunch Buddies as an example. Now when I go and click on Teams, the app bar is always still there and we can see the teams. And this is where we're going to spend the majority of our time together today. We have the ability then to do meetings. So this is what we spoke about also. Within meetings, you from here can then set a meeting up with, yes, the people just in your course, or you can invite people from all around the world. When you schedule this meeting, this is exactly the same as if you schedule a meeting within Outlook. And so what that means is you can invite anybody, whether it's internal or external. And you can also then come back and see this from both Teams and also your Outlook calendar. So it's a single source of truth, which is really, really nice. We'll see from the more apps, these three dots here, you have the ability then to see things like your files, your assignments, as well as also some of the other apps that you might have added to Teams. On the left-hand side, that's also where you've got the ability to then get the application itself if you'd like to install it on your device. And absolutely, I would recommend installing the app on your laptop, so that way it's just integrated a little bit more deeply into the operating system. And the store, which is something that we were speaking about just a moment ago. What the store has are all of those third-party experiences. So you'll see here, I can then scroll through. If for some reason you don't see some of these applications, it means they might be restricted by your IT administrator, but by and large, the store is continuously growing. And so every month that you come back here, you will see more and more options. And you can see the store today from the laptop app experience or from the web browser. And one of the things I did want to call out is you've got the education category. So if you want to jump straight to just the EDU apps that are available, so things like Flipgrid for student feedback. If we look, for example, at Nearpod, or importantly, RSpace is a great example of an application designed for higher education, which is then focused on lab notebooks for particularly the sciences. When we come back, though, to Teams, this is really then the place that I want to spend the time to start with. So you'll see as we go through, what it allows us to do then is on that left-hand side, when I've clicked on Teams, I can see then my teams that I'm currently a part of. So right now we have an entrepreneurship course, we have the School of Business, and we have AI research. So for those that are brand new to Teams, just to let you know, you can then see all of the teams you are a part of here, but this will not show all of the teams within your university. This is just the teams that you have been invited to or created yourself. When you create a team, this is where you'll see it has then channels. So if you think back to Dr. Kellerman from before, he had week 1, week 2, week 3. In this entrepreneurship course, we have a general channel, which is always created by default, and then channels on the key topics within, for example, the course itself, like the business case development. And that looks quite different if we share that compared to the AI research project. In the research project, we're not running a course, obviously we're doing a project itself, and this is where you can see then a different structure to the team. On the right-hand side, this is the canvas. Within the canvas, you'll have then tabs. What those tabs allow you to do then is have always a conversation space, always a file space, and then you'll have the ability to have things like a class notebook, assignments, and then you will see these change based on the team and the way that you customize your team. So how do we create a team itself? Well, let's do that. So down the bottom here on the left-hand side, you'll see join or create a team. This is where you will see the create a team option, as well as also join by code. So you have the ability where if you wanted, say, your colleagues might be running a workshop, or you might have your students, you can provide them a 7-character code. They type that in here, and then they'll instantly be able to join the team you've created. To create the team, simply click Create Team. And now this is a really important decision to make. You'll see here, you have 4 options: a class, professional learning community, staff member, or an anyone team type. What this means is basically, what is the use case and scenario that you would like to use your teams in? Obviously, if you're wanting to work with colleagues on a research project, you probably don't want to refer to them as students, and so you wouldn't click the class team type. By contrast, if we think of Dr. Kellerman, that's where absolutely class makes sense. So what's the difference between these 4? Well, the difference between the 4 is just some of the tabs that are added in. So that files, that class notebook that we saw a few moments ago, The difference, for example, in a class team compared to a staff team is it will use a OneNote class notebook as opposed to a staff notebook. It also has some enhancements specific to then, for example, classes, where you will see the ability, for example, to go through and do things like assignments or management of conversations, like the ability to mute students. Now, within, for example, a professional learning community or a staff member team, that's not necessarily then the same type of capabilities that you would need to do things like a class notebook or muting students. And so that's why those capabilities aren't there. You would see, for example, in a professional learning community, a PLC notebook added instead of a class notebook, and in the staff team members, you'd see a staff notebook. If we think about, well, maybe I'm part of an internal project team and we don't need these different types of notebooks for an assignment service, I just want the anyone team type. And that's really the best type then, whether it's for yourself, where you might be looking to do a project itself, or if we think about students, and students being able to then do things like, for example, running a student society. So if you were then looking to create a research project, you might want to then do a staff member team. If you're looking to collaborate with other people, all of these team types, all four, can have external users added to them. And so that's one of the things I did want to highlight. Once you create these four, they are exactly the same in terms of the ability to add in third-party apps, work together in real time, and invite external users. And so that's something that's very, very powerful to keep in mind. All you're doing is just changing a little bit of the templating out of the box. And then from there, they are identical in terms of the way we can work together and collaborate and communicate. So if I click on, in this scenario, the staff member, you'll see here, now I've got the option to give it a name. So we might call this the School of Economics. But School of Economics isn't really appropriate because right now I'm a lead researcher and I want to work together with some colleagues. So we might call this, we do a lot of things around research. And this one's now going to be focused on some of the machine learning. So it's our research. It's a machine learning research project that we're currently engaged on. We have privacy, so we could make this public. So maybe you might want data sets from people across the university, and you want them to be able to find this project that you're leading. That's when you can make it public, and only the people within your university would find this. Or maybe you can keep this then as private if you only want to bring in select members. What you also have the ability is you might say, well, look, I had the perfect course from last semester. I had the perfect research team, and I don't want to have to set this up from scratch. You don't have to. This is where you can see here, which team do I use? I can have templates. So that means I can come back and I can take, for example, some of the previous semesters, and I can then reuse those again. And so this is where I have that ability then to say, choose this team, and it could be any team that you've created previously, and then I can give it that ML research team name. But what this is going to do is from that original team, it's going to bring across, if I want, the channels, the tabs, the app settings, even the members. And so this is where if I want to go through and do that, I simply click Create. Now, to give you an example of a team that I've created before, we can look at the entrepreneurship. There is one difference to create the entrepreneurship team. This is a course team. And so you'll see here, by comparison, when I clicked on Staff Team, it looks exactly the same. I can come in and I can give this a name. So we'll call this Economics 101. And you'll see that by default, you can't make this public because courses are always then private just for the students who are meant to be part of that course. I can still use a template if I choose. And when I click Next, you'll see here it's already creating the team. It's just that simple. And then at this point is where I can then bring in students or the instructors, the teachers who will be part of that course. If this had been a staff team or an anyone team type, there would not be the difference between students and teachers. It would just say add members, and then I would add everyone as members, and I'm the owner of the team. In this scenario, we'll bring in, for example, a few students that I have. So you can see here there's Matthew, Sherry, and Sophia. And the reason as I start to type their name, it instantly brings them up is because these people are all part of Office 365. So they're existing people, existing students, existing staff members. And why that matters is it means I have the ability, I don't have to type in their full email address. And as we spoke about before, you can completely automate this process as well. I could also bring in a teaching assistant. So for example, Lucia. And now all of these people can come through and be part of this new team that I've created. I simply click Add, and it will instantly bring those people in. I now close, and you can see here within a few seconds, we now have our Economics 101. The reason there were no extra channels added is, as you might recall, For the class team, I did not create click from template. I simply just started from scratch. But you can now see immediately the difference between our entrepreneurship course compared to our economics course. We still have a conversation space, we still have files, a class notebook, and assignments. And then from there, that plus sign will allow me to then further customize this channel. You also see there's no channels beyond general. And again, this is now allowing you to structure your course or your research project. The way that we do this is always from then the three-dot ellipsis. So I'm about to run my course or my project, and for example, in economics, I want to talk about microeconomics is a key part of this course. You'll see here from that three-dot, that ellipsis beside the team name, this is where I can get to more options. So I can manage the whole team. I can add channels. I can add members. I could also get a link. So this shows you a way that you can then add people to the team. So let's say you didn't want to manually type it in and you haven't yet set up automation. You could put get link to team, and you could put this on your Canvas page, your Blackboard page. You could put this link on the page for your students, and then it will bring them into the team when they click on it, and you simply approve to make sure it's students that are meant to come into your course, just in case they haven't forwarded it to anybody else. You'll see here when I click on Manage Team, this is where I can see my existing members. If a student was being disruptive, I could mute them, so that way they're not disrupting in the conversation space. And you'll see here over under Channels, this is where I could come in and I could bring in that microeconomics topic that we'll be talking about. One of the things that's very important is you can then favorite it. So for example, favoriting means it will stay in everybody's view. And it also means that when you mention that channel, that they will receive a notification. And we'll talk about the importance of mentioning in just a few moments' time. But you can see here very quickly, very easily, I now have a bit more structure to my economics course. You'll see, for example, it has conversations, files, but now there's no class notebook and assignments because that's only on the general channel. From there, these are exactly the same as channels I could have made in any other team type. So let's go to an example of a team that has a little bit more content within it. So you'll see here, if I go back to my entrepreneurship course, you can see there's already a rich existing conversation that's been going on. We have things like assignments that have been posted. We have lecture recordings. You can see also conversations from students. So we can see here, Sherry Summers has, for example, posted a handout that we can click on, and it becomes a very rich conversation space. You can even bring in apps. So for example, for having polls that students can give feedback on, PowerPoints, PDFs. Just because this is then part of Microsoft Teams does not mean that it necessarily needs to be part of the Microsoft ecosystem. You can bring in any file that you want to be able to work from an Office document. Absolutely, you can work on those, but you can then bring in images, PDFs, you name it. Now, you'll see here, Jamie Orton's done an important announcement, and that's the due date for the entrepreneurship course. The exam's coming out on October 22nd, which is a Monday, and if you've got any questions, you can speak with Sophia Owen. So how did you do this and why? Well, the conversation space is where we saw those students from Dr. Kellerman's course posting and being able to respond and reply to one another. You can see here, if we look up at the course syllabus, I can actually see over 20 replies and conversations that have been had regarding the syllabus itself. So the way that we make these posts is you can either add an existing file or, for example, you can then make the post. So if I scroll down to the bottom, you'll see here as I'm scrolling, at the bottom of my screen, one thing that hasn't moved is the start a new conversation. This is where I can then post a conversation. So it's asking a question, it's making an announcement. You might recall, though, that that post just before had a little bit more formatting. Directly where it says start a new conversation, type @ to mention someone, you can see here are a number of options. And what these options allow you to do then is provide a little bit more rich content within the conversation that you start. So when I click on the A, what that A does is it allows me to format. So now I can have in a subject, and so we might say exam results released. So everyone wants to know, when does their exam results come out? Now, if I was to just start to type this and say, hi class, your grades will be released. Actually, I'll leave that typo in there. On November 15th, so a little bit later this week. Now, there's two problems with this. One, obviously, there's a typo, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But you'll see here, when I said hi class, Within Teams, just like if you think about email, you need to direct it towards someone. And for those that are using, for example, social media today, like Facebook, the way that you direct notifications is via mentions. And so what you'll see here is when I come in and I click the @ sign, this is how I can now direct this post towards either individuals, to a subgroup, which is my channel, or to everybody in my course. If I hadn't have done the @mention, nobody would have received an activity notification, which is this activity bell in the top left-hand corner, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. So it's very important from best practice around conversations to make sure you direct it towards, for example here, the entire team. And so this is exactly the same whether this was a course or whether this was a research initiative that you're leading. Because now what you can see here is as I've typed in @team, I want all of my students to see this, just like I might want all of the researchers that I'm working with to be aware that we have an important date coming up, for example, on Friday, or I need them to make sure they've checked something. It now says 22 people will see your message. Now there's still a typo, but we're going to leave that for now. And so here we can see when I click send, this is now then sent out the post in the conversation space. Students, colleagues can come in. They can reply to that. So with reply, that's what you can see here. For example, Matthew Sturgis or any of those other students in this course, they could come in and then they can reply. I, for example, could say, yep. Now in this scenario, you can see here, this is replied in context. I could also like this post, which is a sign of acknowledgement, and it comes through and shows, for example, that they've received this. Now remember, we did have that typo, and typos do happen in the modern world. Certainly, whether you're doing a quick message and you're just stepping onto a bus, or for example, you're in transit, typos are a reality. But unlike email, you have the ability to go back and from that ellipsis, click edit. And so now we can go through and we can fix that typo that we had. And so just like that, I can go through and I can then fix the typo, and now it's come back. There's a clear sign that this has been edited, but the good news is we don't have to go back and then resubmit the entire thing. And this is an important point. When we talk about then the experience between email and conversations within Teams, you might say, well, look, I like using email to send my messages. The problem with that is who's been at the end of a reply all after the 10th reply all in a group message? Conversations go out of context. We lose the ability to see. People will start referring to 4 emails ago. They might start a different topic. What Teams is providing is threaded, persistent chat with the ability then to reply in the context of that chat itself. You've also then got the ability to not just work together on conversations, but you'll see here we have then all of the files. So you saw before there was a big conversation between some of the course syllabus, the handouts, lecture slides, and this could be then, for example, part of a research project exactly the same. So when I click on files, now I can then see all of the files that are here. But when we think about then also working with colleagues, what happens if they are at an institution that uses something like Google Drive? Well, this is modern Microsoft. You can see here, I can then go and I can click Add Cloud Storage. This means I can then bring in, if you're using Dropbox today, Google Drive, you can bring in existing cloud storage options as part of your team. You'll see when I go over and I go and look at something like, for example, the presenters plan for the economics aspect of our course. When I click on it, within one click, I can then now have editing with my students, in addition to the ability to see one another's work. What this is allowing is you'll see from where it says the economics presenters plan, I can now edit this document in real time. I also have the ability where other people can come in and work with me. What's important about this, though, is it's not then just the ability for me to be able to work on this, but also how do I create a more inclusive course environment. And so you'll see when I look over, for example, on View, I can click what we call the immersive reader. So for example, this size 12 font might be fine for everybody. I can then, you can see here, Matthew Sturgis has actually started to join me. So you can see Matthew might come down, for example, to Monday, and he's starting to take a time that he'll be presenting. You can see in real time, I can see his cursor, and Matthew's come through and taken a few times a day. Now, but what happens if I need to see this in slightly larger font? So this is where we were talking about, for example, View, Reader. What the immersive reader will allow me to do is then take that same text, and without requiring yourself as the lead researcher, without requiring the academic, so Dr. Kellerman, by clicking that, I can now go through and customize the view to my own visual requirements. I can, for example, change the line spacing where if I move up, I can see all of those words, all of the document in a customizable way for my own visual preferences. So when we start to think about inclusive working environments and inclusive learning environments, the Immersive Reader is an incredibly powerful tool where I can scroll down and I can see, for example, Matthew has started to take times of day. It's more than that. It's also when we think about students where they might be English as a second language. I can now identify the nouns in the text, verbs. And so this is a really powerful capability that's built into Word, OneNote, and also now Microsoft Teams. So this is a really fantastic tool when we start to think about creating more inclusive courses and work environments. In addition to, when you see here, I click exit, that hasn't changed anything permanently. And we could see Matthew came in and worked together with me. When I close out of that, see we then have what we call the OneNote Class Notebook. What the Class Notebook allows you to do, when you create a course, it then gives you a structured environment where you can then have a collaboration space, a content library where you can post content and your students cannot make changes. What's interesting about this is if, for example, you saw before, if we were running a research project, for example, and we wanted a place where people can take their own notes in private, but still be part of that research experience. That's exactly what you get with a staff notebook compared to a class notebook, except it just changes the name ever so slightly. The collaboration space is the same, the content library is the same. You'll see here we have a private place for all of our students to be able to come in and take their own notes. So this is a powerful way where then from the content library, for example, you could then share resources that students cannot change. Or, for example, students can come in and make their own notes. But when we talk about then Teams and how do we integrate it even further, you'll see here we have the ability to have an assignment service. And I'll come back to that in 2 moments. Because what we can do is also within the class notebook, you'll see here, I'm switching now to the Chrome browser, is I'm currently in a class. And what I've done from connections is connected this class notebook to, for example, a learning management system like Canvas. What this allows me to do is, just like you saw before, we have that collaboration space, that content library, and a list of all of our students. Now that I've connected this to my LMS, in this scenario, you can see here, it's Canvas. I can go through and I can review my student work. Go back to the gradebook in Canvas, which is just switching the tabs. You'll see here, for those that are using Canvas today, this will look fairly familiar. We have that entrepreneurship course we've been talking about. Click on the entrepreneurship course, we can see the grades, and we can also go in and see then the results. Well, what happens if I wanted to update these grades directly from Teams within that class notebook? Well, we spoke about before, what about things like economics? Perfect example of where student work is much better represented through notation as opposed to A, B, C, D on the keyboard. My students right now are doing an economic weekly analysis. I want to go through and give them feedback because they're going through and they're doing their supply and demand curves. And so you can see here that we can go in with some of our students, for example, Alex. When we go and click on Alex, what it'll do, go through and then enter the grades. And so we can see here, he's done not too bad. Probably won't give him his art degree, but he has a pretty good looking supply demand curve and he's answered the question, which was what will happen when prices change by 10%. What's powerful when we connect the class notebook is when I click enter grades, you can see here, Alex has said, come back and he said, you know what, here's some compelling reason why I should have a better grade instead of 65, 100. And so I can change that now, go down and click submit. And so I'm marking this from the class notebook with inside of Teams, and this is then pushing back to that grade notebook, which will then update within Canvas itself. And so that's one thing to talk about is the class notebook has structure, but it also then allows you to then connect this back to other LMSs, so that way you can have a singular workflow, and we can see here the grades are submitted. When we go back at Alex, as soon as we click refresh, so Alex is along the bottom of the screen there, it was 65, and then in a few seconds time, update and then show itself to be 75 out of 100. Last part that I wanted to talk to, and then we'll switch across to the example from the research team, is we have an assignment service. And so what this assignment service allows you to do is then create assignments within Teams that students can then come back and, for example, turn in their work. You can see here examples of this. Today, this does not integrate back into other LMSs. It's certainly something that we're always looking and open to feedback on, and we're certainly working towards looking at what other enhancements can we bring in. the enhancements that we have made recently is you can, for example, both create an assignment with rubrics, as well as quizzes that automatically mark themselves, and you can use an existing assignment. So for example, if I click create new assignment, I can come in. It gives me the ability to assign work, have students turn it back in, and as you would expect, for example, the ability for me to then give them grades or no points at all and just give them some feedback, for example, a rubric. In the interest of time today, we won't go into that in more depth, but one thing we did speak about is, well, what happens then if I want to collaborate with a colleague? Maybe I have a fellow course instructor, or more importantly, I'm doing a research project. Well, you've seen here, we have then the conversations, the files, the class notebook, and assignments. Let's go back over, and we're thinking about, well, I'm currently a researcher right now, and I want to work with some colleagues on a project. You still see we have that general channel, except now when I've gone to the general channel in my research project, there's no assignments, there is no class notebook, because we've switched this across to becoming a team, which is not a class team type. This is an anyone team type. And you can then see here the conversations that have been had. You can see if I head down to data collection, it has a few additional tabs. One of those, for example, is Power BI. The way that we bring these in, as that reminder, is from that plus side. This is how we can then bring in these extra experiences like RSpace, like Planner, like Poly. And what Power BI allows us to do then, visualize data within our project. Power BI is what we're talking about here, where you can see it's then bringing in some of the insights that we might be wanting to work together with colleagues on. What's powerful about this is, as you can see, this is actually loading up a real app experience. This isn't just then a static image. So when I click on it, you can see here, we can see some of that data that's come through on this project. We can then also click it, and you can see in real time that dashboard changes. We might be saying, well, we need to make sure we get funding because we've got this awesome idea, a hypothesis that we would really like to put to the test, and we can see, for example, we need to go through and assign some tasks on who's doing what. I've moved now from the data collection to the grant process. You'll see we have then the ability for, within grant process, to go through and then open what we call Planner. Planner is a capability, again, part of Office 365. So one of those tiles that we spoke about a little bit ago as part of Office.com, where I can now come in here and then I can start to see some of the different tasks. I, for example, can assign a new task to someone. This might be something as simple as review recent. A quick example. I can assign that to somebody. So we can say right now that's going to be up to Ellen that she needs to do. Just like that, we have now a task assigned. You can see, for example, the budget review, the grant release, all of these things are simply tasks that give us a lightweight, easy way for our colleagues to be able to assign tasks to one another. You can then mark them off when they're complete, for example, and then just like that, it's a nice, another edition of Office 365, bringing together into a single place within Teams. We spoke then about how the store then brings in a whole host of third-party app experiences to extend these capabilities even further. And so this is what you're starting to see. But you might be saying, well, what happens to, how do I add in someone who is external to my university? You want to work together with them on the conversations. You want to have task tracking. You want to work together in real time on files. Well, the way that you do that is from back in the beginning here. When you click on that 3 dots, you'll see there where it says Manage Team. We also then have Add Members. And so this is where we can then add members to the team. Now, this, of course, can be existing members within your university, or it can be some last examples where it's someone external. So right now, we're logged in as Jamie Orton. And Jamie actually also has a colleague that he's working with. And so you saw, for example, we had Sherry Summers, but Summers also has a twin who is over at another university using Gmail. And so this is where we can see that Sherry now, I can then simply click at gmail.com and I can add that as a guest. By clicking this pencil icon, I can then also update her name as it would appear. So for example, she might be preferred to be referred to as S. Summers. And so absolutely, you can go through and you can make that change. It's external to the university. This is where it tries to find out the name based on the email and then customize that as well. When you click Add, that would then send Sherry, for example, an invitation welcoming her to Teams, would go through to her Gmail account. This could also be a fellow Office 365 account at another university. This could be any online email account you can send this to, at Outlook, Hotmail, you saw Gmail, another institution, and they do not need to have a license for Office 365 in terms of having Teams. All they need to do is you are inviting them to your team, so they don't need their own Teams license. You're coming and they're working with you. You'll see here on the top right-hand corner, this is where we can then switch and then move between our institution, and for example here, because I work at Microsoft, you can see this is a guest in Microsoft, and so we can move across. But this would also have other university names if you're working with colleagues from another university. And so just like that, you can see here how we've been able to go from an entrepreneurship course where we had conversation space. You can then @mention both the individuals, you can @mention the channel, and you can @mention all of the people by using @mention at team. You've seen from the point of view of the tabs, this is where you could go through and then have those different tabs and many more. One of the important ones to finish with is, well, what happens if you have a resource that doesn't necessarily have an integration today? Maybe you've got a Blackboard site. This is where you can have a web tab embedded into your team. And when you bring in a website, this could be Canvas, this could be Moodle, this could be a research website that you'd like people to access from within Teams. And so this is where, as long as it is a secure URL, you can embed that into your team. Last thing is then you saw meetings. So this is where we can then do online meetings. And you've got the ability within Meet Now, is where you see here, I can start a meeting for just the people who are part of my course or part of my research project. And so if you've added them in as an external member, they can then join you, or you can always start a meeting with anyone on the planet and it'll just send them a link like you would expect with pretty much any other online meetings platform. And again, they can join you for a one-off meeting just through clicking the link. So you've seen now a few examples of how Teams can be used in both an academic course community scenario, but also how we can then enhance it to build up our research project. If you are ever lost and saying, well, look, this is great, but how do I get a little bit more help? From that ellipsis, so the 3 dots there on the side, you'll see there was one of the options is called Help. This is a fantastic place to start once we've finished the call today. If you are wanting to revisit something, and it has a lot of how-to guides that'll help you through it. See, there's a tab for videos, and this is where it gives you then videos that you can cover off. In addition to, at the bottom of the page on the bottom left-hand side, this is where you can then see also that help. If you've ever had any sort of a technical issue, you can report a problem. And if you've got a great idea, we would love to hear from you. You can also suggest feature ideas, and our team absolutely go through and review them. So this is a fantastic place to be able to get a little bit more help to get you started. So I know we're getting towards the end of today, so I'd like to finish off then with one last example, some resources to help you get started. So what you're going to see here is an example from Teesside University. Teesside University are one of the universities in the United Kingdom where they said, how do we do holistic digital change? And they had a digital transformation project called Future Facing Learning. This project was then focused on not just 1 or 2 academic staff members, but 400 staff members, and how do they really help upskill them? Just realized that's showing the wrong way around, so that should be a bit of a nicer view for you all. There it goes. So now you can see here with Teesside University, what they did was they embarked on using then, of course, having on-site trainers, part of their instructional learners, but what they also used are the free resources. You saw that the help feature in Teams gives you some short videos, but what happens if you want to also receive recognition for the time and the skills that you are building up? And if you go to education.microsoft.com, this is where we run the Microsoft Innovative Educator Program. This is a free on-demand series of courses. Some are on Teams, but some are on all of the other parts that we didn't get to talk to about in more depth today. How to use things like Microsoft Forms, for example, to do real-time surveys and quizzes and get feedback. How do you use the OneNote class notebook, the OneNote staff notebook to coordinate staff members and then bring together meeting notes, to bring together professional development? How do we then do things like also recognizing those people who are really investing the time to upskill themselves? And this is a great tool and a fun, wonderful platform that they've invested in as part of their change development and part of that digital change strategy that they have and they're working towards. But to help you then begin yourself, you'll see here One of the last assets that we'll be sharing with you are 3 key areas. For those of you that have said, look, I'd love my IT members to be able to get access to some more of this technical training because I want them to be able to do automatically creating teams for me. You go to edX.org. There are free Microsoft courses on there. The main one I would recommend is Enabling Teamwork with Microsoft Teams. That's a course designed for those who are administering teams to work with you to help make sure it's been well set up. For those that would like to start their own research project, their own internal learning community, or get started with some of those courses from the educator community that we saw, if you go to aka.ms/staff teams course, this is a short URL you can put into your browser right now. What this will do is it will give you then a short 1-hour on-demand course. If you're really quick, you might get through it in 30 minutes, but it's giving you then some videos, some materials, and importantly also when you complete it and complete the quiz at the end, you also then get recognition that you've completed this course and you've taken time out of your day, one, to absolutely hopefully get some great new skills, but then also be able to show something for the time that you've invested. And the last part is then the aka.ms, so the theme there, aka.ms/using teams. So this is, again, a shortened URL. When you type it in, you'll see it goes to a bit of a longer URL, and then this is an on-demand, what we call Microsoft Sway. So this then gives you, it's a presentation I'm sharing with you all today. So you will see here the videos from Dr. Kellerman, from Teesside University, how the Heart Research Institute, for example, was able to go through and have those secure projects that they managed with 150 initiatives around the world. How Teesside University are using things like the educator community to be able to upskill staff and also build up their own capabilities. And for example, Dr. Kellerman, and as well as other examples we didn't get time to cover off today. I want to thank everyone for joining us for this 1-hour introductory Microsoft Teams for Higher Education session. I hope you saw some great ways that you can then help build course community, increase student engagement, and also then securely collaborate and meet together with colleagues from around the world and run research projects, whether it's someone within your institution or the ability within Teams to add anyone that has an online email address to your team to collaborate securely. I want to thank you all very much. If you have some questions, we'll be still answering them. So on that left-hand side of your screen, feel free to post them. And at the end of this, there'll be a short survey to share a little bit of your feedback, how you found today. We'd love to hear from you, and please do continue to share this webinar series. We'll have more coming up in February, and the feedback you shared today will also help inform us to maybe do things like a more advanced session in early 2019. Thank you all so much for your time today, and have a great afternoon, morning, or wherever you are in the world. Have a wonderful day. Thank you all.